Campaigners in the infected blood inquiry are demanding urgent action on compensation 3 months on from final recommendations. The inquiry investigating what's been described as the worst treatment disaster in the NHS will hear from senior politicians through this week. It's looked into evidence more than 1,000 people were infected with HIV after being given blood products between 1970 and 1991. Joining me now on LBC News is Jason Evans, Director of Factor 8, the UK's leading infected blood scandal campaign organisation. His father was also a victim of the scandal. Jason, good morning.
Good morning.
Just firstly, if you would, certainly for the benefit of my listeners, just tell us a little more about your family's own story. What happened to your dad?
Sure. So my father was born with the blood clotting disorder, haemophilia. And like virtually every haemophiliac around the country in the 1970s, 1980s, he began to be treated with what was then a new product called Factor 8 concentrate used to treat haemophilia. And before then, the previous treatment, which was called cryoprecipitate, was similar to a blood transfusion, if you like, in that it was from one unit, from one volunteer donor on the NHS. But this new product, Factor 8 concentrate, was a for-profit pharmaceutical drug. It was made by mixing the blood plasma donations of thousands of people together. And often this product was imported from overseas in the US. The people from whom plasma was collected, it included those who were paid, prisons around the US, from South America. And so, you know, it was known from the beginning, the inquiry's seen the evidence, this product was super risky. The risks were well known. The inquiry has shown that, and it's been pretty difficult, I think, for all of us to hear all of the kind of damning evidence that's come to light.
Indeed, and the problem goes on, doesn't it? I was reading some comments from you a little earlier. For the benefit of our listeners, let me just read them out. We know that 380 children were infected with HIV. Many of those died in childhood and their parents are now in their 80s. We know of people who have died only recently. People are dying without seeing any acknowledgement. And presumably everything you've said to me up to now is in that letter?
So what we haven't done is we haven't packed out the letter with all the detail and facts because, look, the government will be well aware of that. They've had their counsel and representatives at the inquiry the whole way through the inquiry. When it published this report in April, it said that wrongs were done on an individual, collective and systemic level. So all these, wrongs that were done are well known. It's why the government have accepted themselves that compensation is going to need to be paid. But I mean, what you say there is really, really true, that, it's those who were infected, many of whom have already died. People continue to die. Someone who I know personally died only, or knew personally died only this month, someone who was themselves infected. Parents are dying because many of the parents whose children were infected with HIV are now, in their senior years and are dying without seeing any acknowledgement for what was done to their children. And so it's appalling, really. It really, really is.
And obviously, you're a core participant in this inquiry, and now you're one of 6 people delivering that letter to Number 10. I should have explained that a little earlier. Tell us a little more then about what's in the letter, and also what do you want to be hearing from the relevant politicians appearing this week? People like Penny Mordaunt, people like Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, and the Prime Minister himself.
So, although the inquiry published its final recommendations on compensation in April this year, the government have actually had a compensation framework since March of last year. They'd asked Sir Robert Francis, KC, to undertake that for them. And so they've actually had a compensation framework since well over a year ago. And in April, the inquiry basically just endorsed that study. And so none of this is new to the government. They've known for a long time this is coming down the track. But as I say, we're now well over a year on, and basically nothing has happened in regards to getting this compensation system set up. And so, the hearings that are going on this week, where we're going to hear from the Prime Minister and other senior ministers, they were never planned to be held originally. The reason they've been called is precisely because nothing has happened. And so today, Penny Mordaunt is giving evidence. She was Paymaster General when that compensation study I was referring to was set up last year. And so we're delivering a letter to number 10 today, calling on the Prime Minister to take action before he gives evidence on Wednesday, because really, time is up. Diana Johnson, when she spoke, MP Dame Diana Johnson, when she spoke in Parliament about this recently, she said over and over again, it's time, it's time, it's time. And that's where we're at. People just cannot wait any longer. It just cannot go on any longer.
No, of course, it sounds absolutely dreadful. When it comes to compensation, then, give us a sense of what, presumably, you would have been told about what your own family's entitled to and others within the Factor 8 group.
So within that compensation framework I was talking about, there set out, I think, what the community as a whole regards as a fair resolution in terms of the finances to this. And of course, money cannot bring people back from the dead. It cannot give them back their health. But what it can do is restore them to the financial position they would have been in if this hadn't have happened. And of course, we now know it shouldn't have happened and was entirely preventable. And so Sir Robert Francis and also Sir Brian Langstaff, who's the chair of the inquiry, they set out 5 awards for compensation, which include things like compensation for the injury that occurred, people's financial losses, their loss of autonomy, and some other awards. And that's going to differ depending on people's individual circumstances, what they were infected with and how severe it was, what the financial impact was on them. And people have lost so much. I know recently there's been a couple of media articles which have talked about the cost of all this. And, frankly, the cost will be high, but it's high because the loss and suffering that has occurred is high. And we live in a country where, look, when people negligently harm and kill people, there is a price to be paid for that. And that is what has happened here.
Jason, really good to speak with you this morning. Thanks ever so much indeed for telling us your story in particular and your hopes now, certainly once that letter is delivered. Jason Evans there, Director of Factor 8, the UK's leading infected blood scandal campaign organisation, and his own dad was a victim of that scandal. Let me just read out then a statement from a government spokesman on this. It says the government accepts the moral case for compensation and work is ongoing across the UK government and in consultation with the devolved administrations to consider as quickly as possible the recommendations put forward in the inquiry's second interim report.